So happy Wednesday, everyone. Good morning to you all. Good to see all your faces. I think as we jump in, I see some of y'all have already started having conversations on the forum. So great job. I've seen some great, and at the same time, I've seen some good interactions between each of y'all. So thank you for those of you who are leaning into it. And I really encourage for those of you who maybe haven't had the opportunity to do so, to definitely continue to chat with each other. I would say our weekly check-in is going to be a good way for us to connect, but at the same time, those forums are a great way for you all to connect as well. So what I'd like, and if you're able to, let's do this in the chat rather than doing it out loud. But if you can, put your name, the city you're located, and then the name of your church here. I think I see Tasha and Susan on their phone, so I do apologize for that. Might be a little bit trickier there.
Well, I'm on my iPad, but I don't know how to do it.
If you click your screen, it should bring up like a setting of functions under
Okay.
the screen, and then one should say I have like a little message bubble that says chat. All right, got Indy, Indianapolis, Tasha, Kansas, Georgia, Washington. I just want y'all to know where everyone's from here. Chelsea, good to see you today. I don't believe we had Mei Ling or Chelsea with us last week. And so it's good to see our new faces here. All right. Are there no West Coast folks on this call? Am I the only West? Is it?
Oh, no.
Am I the only one? Oh, that's right. Mei Ling, you're in Seattle. I was gonna say, am I the only one drinking coffee still? All right. Well, thank you for doing that, folks. Again, I think part of our goal here is one, to build a community around you as we're starting to develop this Faith and Finances program. As you heard from me last week, Faith and Finances is part of the Chalmers Center. And the Chalmers Center, I believe, has done a fantastic job building community around faith and finances. And I feel like that's a great piece of their secret sauce to why the program works. Not just building community in your churches, but also building community between facilitators. And we really do become resources to each other in the process. So again, really encourage y'all to be leaning into those chats. But I do have a question for you, just kind of I think in general, an icebreaker for us, but what has been your experience when you're working on a project, when you start with the end goal in mind? In my line of work and some of the consulting that we do here, we often call it reverse engineering a project, starting with the end goal in mind. But again, I'll reiterate that question to you. What has been your experience when you begin a project with the end goal in mind? And that's an open question to everyone.
We have to look for ways to achieve the goal once you've set a goal. So sometimes it helps you, then you can brainstorm with others so that you know how to achieve that goal and find ways to help someone.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you, Susan.
I think that when you start off with the end goal when you start your project thinking about the end goal, it helps you to strategize how to get where you already know where you want to go. So for example, if we're trying to create a budget and I know I want to go to Mexico on vacation, I know that this budget is going to have to look a certain way to make sure that I can get the end goal, which is have a good time in Mexico. So, I mean, I think it's a good thing when I do goals, I feel like I always start with the end and then try to figure out, okay, how do I make that happen? Because this is what I want to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys, we're vacationing with Tasha this year. That's fantastic.
I think it also takes, it allows you to be more efficient because if you start with the end goal, you're able to kind of backtrack of what tasks really need to take place. Sometimes if you start with the beginning, you end up doing tasks that won't quite get you there, which leads you to be more efficient if you start with the end goal.
That's fantastic. Well said, Chelsea.
To be flexible for changes that that can change your idea and thought in the process.
No, well said. And I guess I'd follow up on this question to the group. How is this helpful in that project? And hopefully y'all can think of something of a specific project when you did this.
It really keeps you from going down rabbit trails. You know, it really helps focus all of your energy and is staying on mission.
Yeah.
I think I like what Chelsea said, where you're efficient. You know, sometimes we catch ourselves trying to figure out what the end goal is, and we waste a lot of time because we don't know, we're trying to figure it out. And so when you have the end goal at mind, like Chelsea said, you become more efficient and you're not wasting time or going down the rabbit hole, as Bonnie said.
That's fantastic. And I love what y'all are bringing. Two pieces that I'll bring in here, and this is maybe more personal than what Chalmers would say. And I can't speak, Mark's on the call here too, so he can yell at me later. But two activities that we often do on the reverse engineering side is obviously the end goal in mind. And I think, Chelsea, you said backtrack, right? And then we think of what are the activities that accomplish those goals? And then you take a step back from that and you say, what human capital do we need to achieve those goals? And then we look at how much money is that going to cost us, and you can also overlay time with that. And then you really start to get an idea of what we can afford, what we can do, what capacity and capabilities do we have currently within the institution, and what maybe needs to be outsourced along the way if we want to do that. On the other end, there is this what we call 5-star activity that I'm a big fan of. And usually I have our entrepreneurs go through this, but also in our work with nonprofits, where I want you to think of what a 1-star review looks like in your business or your nonprofit, right? And then what is 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, all the way up until 5 stars. And ask yourself, what do I need to do to provide a 5-star experience, if you will? And so in the same way, in our faith and finances classes, you might realize, like, man, I only have resources and capabilities to provide a 3-star experience, but I'm going to provide the best 3-star experience until I'm able to provide 4 or 5 stars. But I love what y'all are saying so far about this end in mind goal. And so again, I really would encourage y'all, and I've seen a lot of that in the chat already of some of your goals that you want to accomplish. Now, I would encourage you, if you came up with those by yourself, as you go back to your church leadership or institutional leadership, that you might bring a couple other folks to kind of say, hey, here's my goal through this program. Right? Does that align with what you're saying, what you're viewing, or how would that change? Because at the same time, as I said last week, we very much do need church leadership buy-in in the process, because it's going to make our role as facilitators and starting programs in the church so much easier, or in community. It's just something to keep in mind there. I will throw this out to you all. Any lingering questions about the platform or what we covered in week 1? Y'all heard a prayer from one of my favorite facilitating partners in Marsha, by the way. Y'all feeling good about after week 1? Yeah. What were your early impressions of the video that we watched this week?
Well, I
like
think that
sorry, go ahead.
it was very informative and well spoken, and was the goal that each of us should have, the way that it should be met, of overcoming obstacles and moving in that direction. The lady, I forget her name, but she was very well spoken.
Geraldine? Thank you, Susan.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of thinking about God's kingdom versus, the American dream, and how those, they're not necessarily, you can't have, you can only do one of those things, but to just know what the real goal here is, the fact that I can reach the American dream by having more doesn't mean it's all for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was just a good way to think through how to use finances or strategy or any of it to always think about how you're glorifying God in that. I like what you said about the American dream, it's not all for me, but to think through how to steward what we are trusted with in a way that is glorifying to God, and to constantly kind of have that thought process to think through when making decisions.
Mhm.
Yeah, and apart from what was mentioned, in the video and in the material, I think you hear stories of people who maybe have achieved the American dream, but then they're still empty, or there's still emptiness in their lives. And so we know that there's I think learning from this material that there's just a whole nother spiritual aspect that really needs to come into play.
It's very well said, Mei-Ling.
I think that's the hard part to help those that are in poverty and have many needs to understand and commit. And that's where our faith in God and our belief in what his word says plays a big part in this whole program, that it has to be based on him. And we have to find a way without pushing it down the participants' throats, that without God, we have nothing. And I think that's a key thing for us to be able to learn to do on their level, for them to understand that.
And would you summarize by saying meeting them where they are, Susan? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that can happen even better when you're not pushing the American dream. Because if you haven't achieved it, you may feel like a failure and have some sense of shame in that. But to understand that God's economy isn't the American dream necessarily, and that there's success. I think we talked about that in one of the other questions. There's success with whatever you have that's considered faithful, and
Right.
It doesn't have to be that there's this lofty goal of the American dream and you're a failure if you don't get there. It is that kind of meeting them where they are at and
Yeah.
valuing that.
Well, and I love the way you said that, right? And it makes me think of asking the group, what aha moments have you had this week, if you've had an aha moment? And Bonnie, you said one there, that God's economy isn't necessarily the American dream, but you can accomplish both. And I would have come back to thinking of where your heart's aligned here, right? Is it for the Lord, or is it for the love of money? A lot more to be said there, but I guess to oversimplify it, that's where my mind goes. But any aha moments this week from the content?
I'm not sure that it was an aha moment as much as it was just a really inspiring moment to see the story of the man that was in jail and came out and was homeless, and
Maurice.
and just his story. And I understand it's not the guarantee for every person, but that was such an inspiring story to really see huge fruit from a program like this. And it just inspired me to think we really can change lives, like, dramatically.
Yeah.
Well, we have a lady in our church that's South African that's been in this country for several years. And she actually first came to our Ashland Loves food pantry and clothing ministry, and through that has been saved and is now serving in Ashland Loves on every Thursday when we're open. So it works, guys.
Yeah.
You know, it's just exciting when you see the fruits of your labor. It helps us to be more encouraged, I think, each of us, no matter what aspect we're working toward.
Fantastic. And maybe we have a Maurice in our lives that reminds us of the man that was mentioned here. Part of what I loved about that video, when I think about it, is he says a line in there that's so profound to me that says, I don't even want to think about what my life would have been without faith and finances, because I know what it is with faith and finances. And to me, that's such an encouraging line that I would say, not that I need reinvigorating to continue the faith and finances work after a decade, but I think it's a helpful reminder of the transformational power it has here for people. We will often say in financial literacy, especially when starving payday lenders in our community, is we have no idea how much more capacity humans have or people have when they're not slaves to poverty or to concentrated poverty. What do they call them? Sharks? Yeah. Because right, they're paying 450% interest on loans, and that's what it's controlling their lives. And so how much more capacity could people have if they really truly experience freedom in that way? So just a quick reminder here from us is in the same way it transformed Maurice's life, what could that do for other folks, even if it's a little bit smaller than what it did for Maurice? For one gal recently, we had her and her 3 children as a single mother, and her whole goal was to move into a 2-bedroom apartment because she wanted to give her children their own room. They were all girls, and yeah, by the end of the program, she walked away with a realistic expectation of like, I can accomplish this by the summer. And so again, it's just sometimes it's small goals, sometimes it's huge goals like Maurice. But again, you never know how much that changes the shalom, I would say, in their lives or the quality of the lives that they're experiencing. Any other aha moments that y'all would like to share from this week?
I was just following on what you were saying, Carlos, is that, yeah, the shalom in seeing that now as I can actually get there. I can do this. You know, it is possible for me to take control and make these things happen for myself.
You know, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Amelie.
One of the last statements, I guess it was a video that was mentioned, was about how reaching out to the people. You hear about people living outside the margins or beyond that area, and then how we can help them come inside. And I think that is it the story of Maurice that Bonnie was mentioning, how that's just a perfect example of that. Someone came alongside him. He was on, kind of outside the margins, but welcomed him and came alongside him. And now he's able to be more financially secure, and coming into that circle of community.
Yeah, no, and the power of community in that story again. For those of you, show of hands, how many of you have read the book When Helping Hurts?
I have.
Okay. If you haven't, like, I would totally prioritize that in like the next 3 months if you're looking to pick up a read, just because I feel like it's so foundational to some of this work as well. And I think one piece that they do, and just tying in Mei Ling's point here and also Julie's, is shalom, right? We think of shalom as restoring things to the way God intended them to be in people, for people, and between people. I say we because I am not the Chalmers Center, even though I do train with the Chalmers Center. However, on the Chalmers Center side, one piece that they bring up are these 4 key relationships, right? Relationship with God, relationship with ourselves, relationship with each other, and then relationship with God's creation. And oftentimes people experience brokenness in one or multiple of those relationships that then produce an outflow of how they would spend or manage their money, their lives, their resources, their time to compensate for that broken relationship. And often what we have seen is folks on the margins, often have little to no community around them because of how much brokenness they've experienced in their lives. And so coming back to Maurice's story, how powerful it is that I don't know Maurice's full story of how much community he had around him, but we do know that power community had in transforming his life. And so I thank you for bringing that up, Mei Ling. I think it's a helpful reminder to our journey here. Next question I think I would pose to the group then, and I will say, if a question comes to you from last week or from the platform and you just thought of it now, like, please don't hesitate to answer it, even though we moved on to questions. I want to make sure y'all are navigating through the platform easily and you're understanding how to get from here to there and do all of that you need to. But question for the group is, how well have you thought out your core team of local volunteers or partners? Who do you have that may be interested in helping, whether it's a facilitator, an ally? Are they from your church? Are they from your community? If you remember this last week, you all read definitions for what your team would look like and the different roles that apply to those, to your teammates.
I'll say right up front that I don't have a team. You know, that was a challenge for me to think, okay, who could I begin casting this vision to and bring along? I think it'll take some time to do that piece and discern who the people are that connect with that vision.
Well, and yours is a little bit more unique, Bonnie, where you might even play a role like what we do at CCT in my organization here at the university, where we train others to do the program, but like our trainers also do individual workshops at their churches. So you really are like a resource hub for the pastors that you're vetting the program for. So there are models out there very similar to what you're probably looking to do. But again, just something I would mention offhand here.
We took a couple of months talking to different people at our church, trying to get them to enlist and giving them time to think about it. We still haven't had enough success, enough allies, but we just asked them to pray about it. And we actually gave them the book, What It Means to Be an Ally, which helped them to see what they needed. And I think part of it is the long-term commitment for some people to follow that person for months after the class is even over, to make sure that they have checkups and check-ins and that they're doing all right.
Yeah.
But Julie and myself, we are through the pastor. We have different ministry, outreach ministry that we think that this could be utilized, but as a team, we probably have to sit down and work towards that.
That's okay. I will say I don't expect y'all to have all your pieces figured out after week 1 of training, but I think Pastor Anthony, what you're mentioning here is hopefully people come to mind, or as you have conversations, you're pulling them in. Susan, I did want to mention one thing on the ally side. And again, this is something more contextualized for like Fresno and what we've done over the years is we often do want to bring in allies, but you're right. Some people are really afraid of that commitment, but like more so of their time and energy. In COVID right now, we're having people really fearful of committing to an in-person class. And so some of these are running online. Some of them are in a lot smaller format than they normally would. But on the ally side, what our expectation usually is for folks is to be there between the 10 to 12 weeks that we run the program. And then if the relationship is healthy, if you will, it'd be great for them to stay in touch. Right? It's helpful to the tracking process, but I would say any organization we've ever worked with, when it comes to statistics and tracking metrics over the long term, it's really difficult to stay in touch with people once they complete your program, unless they're in something else
Right.
of yours. And so while ideal, I would come back to, I personally, right, I would come back to those folks and say, well, what do you feel like you could, what is reasonable to you? What could you do? Because some folks really like the every other week check-in. Some people, I have some folks that want to meet once or twice every week because they're usually retired and they love that they come from this line of work. So they love this kind of stuff. So just food for thought for you and the group as y'all are putting your teams together.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any questions on building your teams by chance?
From your experience, give us an idea who we can seek to, what type of member that we can seek to build, to have, to be effective on team. One has, I think it's faith is important, but what else do you see is important?
Yeah. Would you say like building a profile for who's going to be part of the team, or would you say the roles of the people, like who's on the team?
Who's going to be a part of the team?
Okay. Because on one end, I would say faith is very key to this. Not that people without faith in this context can't be helpful. There's a lot we could learn from folks in those contexts, but for the context of faith and finances, like if they're going to be an ally or involved in the process, that's one thing. We often do have like credit unions and banks and lenders who provide reasonable products, right, to come into some of our workshops. Not all of them are always people of faith, but they do provide a service. Like we have a credit union that refinances car loans. I can't tell you how many times people come in. Me and this one person drove the exact same car. I have a 1.8% rate on my car, and she had an 18% rate on her car. So we went and refinanced that for her down to about 4%, right? And so finding these kind of resources are important to the ecosystem of your program. I'll speak from two avenues, if you will, to building teams. One at Section 8 Housing Authority complexes, because we do host these workshops through my church and through CCT here, and in partnership with the Housing Authority. But then I also lead them at my church. Right. So on the Housing Authority side, usually because we're coming in as outsiders, we try to find the resident service coordinator to be part of our recruiting team. Hey, will you go knock on their doors, pass out flyers, let them know this is happening? In Section 8 here in Fresno and in California, residents are required as in their time to take some kind of financial literacy course. And so that's why ours comes up. And I mentioned the story to y'all of how this partnership happened with the Housing Authority, where they feel like faith was a missing component in some of their programs because their residents were very deep people of faith. And so usually I try to have a co-facilitator. I usually try to also have one or two allies, one as a female and one as a male, specifically to honor that kind of male-female dynamic. I think, and then I do co-facilitate most of my workshops with a couple, and they are fantastic because they enjoy the facilitation side, but they very much enjoy the connecting with people and serving people side. And so I would say that's what the team looks like in Housing Authority, obviously the resident service coordinator and anyone else on their team, they do usually allocate someone to do childcare during the courses as well. So in each of these community centers, they usually have like a library or a nursery where the kids go hang out and get connected as well. And then depending if it's like a Saturday morning or lunchtime Saturday, they usually have someone cooking breakfast or lunch for us, right? But in this arrangement with Housing Authority, they are responsible for most everything, if you will. Our commitment to them is to come in and facilitate and to do the coaching and development of people over time. Now on the church side, always a co-facilitator with me. Always have our admin and operations person in on this, because whether we're using the coffee shop back room or we're using a church conference room, I need someone to let me know, is this being used at this time? Because activities do happen during the week at our church all the time. Often need food. And what I like about this is folks really enjoy the potluck style. We haven't done this in COVID, I will say. But usually it had been potluck. Someone commits to bringing some kind of meal on a sign-up sheet every week. And I would say this is where culture kind of clashes with each other, where some folks might say like, hey, these people are in poverty. How can I expect them to bring any food, right? But I would say that also kind of robs them of the spiritual gift of generosity and hospitality that they have, where it very much is fulfilling and connects them closer to the Lord when they're able to serve people in that way. So just something to think about there. And then obviously the allies, my church is a lot easier because I have a lot of financial planners and CPAs. Not that everyone has to be that, but there are folks who have specific set of skills who are able to provide that kind of connection for folks. And then the church is always so pumped to build connections with new folks, because the workshops are offered to the community at large. And we often do have people who are trickling in from the community. So for us, it's a great community connection platform as well. Because I mean, our church is planted in one of the highest poverty neighborhoods in our city. And so financial chaos, right, tears at the fabric of our community there. So that's what I would say, Pastor Anthony. Obviously, our pastor is very well in touch with what we're doing. He usually pops in and says hi. He will be at the graduation ceremony that we have. And we can start talking about logistics down the road as we get closer to that piece. But when I think of building my team, those are the folks that I feel like are important to making this engine go. But my hope in building a team is, I feel like my gifting is not organizational or detail stuff. So I need someone on my team to do that. But I do feel like I'm really great at facilitating and connecting with people. So the more I can free myself up to the 4 or 5 hours I give myself a week to this, the more I can focus on that than doing all the other ancillary, if you will, operations. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes.
I would say some workshops are really great at getting one ally to one participant. I just don't have that deep of a roster at our church for folks to want to become allies, but some churches do. And so I would free y'all of the pressure trying to find one ally to one participant. That would be great, but it's not always realistic either.
Thank you. That was my next question.
Yeah. And that's why I say we have 1 or 2 allies usually. And there are some folks that just floating from other churches as well. They're like, hey, Carlos, anytime there's a workshop, let me know. And so, in a normal year, we might have 20 to 30 workshops running in different churches throughout the city, but it just depends. Yeah.
How many people do you have in a workshop?
Yeah, my favorite sweet spot is 8 to 15. I've done workshops with 25 and 30. I've done workshops with as little as 5. At 5, the dynamic really changes in the workshop. I feel like the closer you can get to 15 or so, that's kind of the best dynamic. because there is some role playing, there's a lot of conversations being had, and you'll usually have those 2 or 3 people that will command the conversation. And so part of, their role as facilitator is also helping others, participate in that. And so the more people that you have in that setting, the easier it is, I would say, than just picking your normal, hey, you haven't said anything today, you should say something today. But yeah, that's usually my sweet spot is 8 to 15, but closer to the 15 side. And I would say anything smaller than 5. I think, Susan, you had 3. Did you mention that?
Right. We had some that dropped out, so we had 3. It was awkward at times.
Well, and at that point, it becomes more of a conversation than like a course, if you will, which isn't the worst thing. I mean, it's still very helpful to them, but the dynamic changes.
Right, absolutely.
And Susan, you bring up a great point. I would say you could do the best job in the world connecting with folks, feeding them childcare, transporting them to workshops, and they still will drop out. And so on any given workshop, I would say expect 20 to 40% attrition rate from participants in your workshops, especially when it comes to the credit report week. And I mean, I don't necessarily to be funny, but it's just a reality for some of our folks is they've never looked at a credit report or know that their credit score is going to, not that we're looking at their credit score, but the credit report isn't going to be very healthy.
Right.
So there's a lot of shame to that. And so people don't come back after that week. And so we try our best to reassure people, connect with them, and let them know, hey, we're not going to be sharing this with anyone. But to Susan, what you're saying here, attrition does happen. So keep that in mind.
Thank you.
And I would say it's nothing that you do wrong. It's just what happens in the process. And these are great questions, by the way. I love this because this is my lived reality all the time running these workshops too. So as we talk about our workshops, as we talk about community this week, part of your challenge was to put your vision for a Faith and Finances community into writing. I enjoyed reading these this week, but would anybody like to reshare their hopes and dreams for community, for the community you'd be working with through Faith and Finances? Whether you have that, or maybe I can just, I won't read them all out loud, actually. I won't do that to you guys.
I think I answered for the class with my local church in mind and thinking about getting this started in a local church. But even just this conversation today has helped me think more and get a bigger vision for what could happen at our pastors' levels, where they could really use this in ministering to their communities and really building the word is, but the helping the community see the need for a church, or just.
Sorry.
Anyway, so it helps me to think, what can I do that will help pastors do this in their communities, and just the idea of what the church could be if we really embrace the marginalized and move from the center of our churches, where we're just a little clique that does the Christian thing, to be able to reach out and love and be one with all of God's people.
That's great, Bonnie. Thanks for sharing that. But one thing I would note too is, like, you kind of have like a multiplying potential to what you're planning to do, where you're serving pastors through this, and the pastors can do this in their church and their networks. I will note that usually pastors aren't the facilitator of these programs, in the sense of pastors usually have like the day-to-day of the church. They're going to the hospital with folks, they're praying for births, they're doing kissing babies, handshakes, all the above. And so we haven't seen as many pastors, even though we do have pastors who are like, I love financial literacy. This is what I want to give myself to, and the church gives the okay there, but they're usually pulling someone else in for community connection or whoever it is. So just something to keep in mind, Bonnie, too, as you're talking to pastors, is like, who would you identify to champion this in your church? Because again, you would need a, in my view, each of you would be the champion in your own churches for this program. But it necessarily isn't always the pastor that runs everything about faith and finances.
I assume it would be very helpful for the pastor to have the passion for it, though,
Yes,
to
absolutely.
really be the key
Mhm.
cheerleader and
Yes,
being the momentum moving.
100% want to have their buy-in and their support along the way.
What about the church buy-in as well?
Well, the church buy-in goes a long way as well when it comes to recruiting, telling their friends or neighbors about it, supporting its allies. I do think that this is something you should announce, whether it's on the bulletin or even from the podium to your church. It's like, hey, we're starting this ministry. We've seen it, and if you're trying to build credibility, you can talk about things like the Chalmers Center and the When Helping Hurts book for it. Any way that you can build some excitement for it, that would be great. And again, be careful with language, right? Because again, this program is geared to low to moderate income populations. So you don't want to say, hey, we're starting a faith and finances, a financial literacy program for poor people, right? Like then it becomes a program for poor people, if you will. But finding creative ways to talk about that, right? Do you experience financial chaos in your life, or do you feel like you could need a little support budgeting and reconciling your finances with your relationship with Christ? Like you will find creative ways to help people connect why a church would lean into financial literacy. Yeah. Sometimes some church, like I have a church in Dinuba. I say, like, you guys know my context, sorry. And there's a city not too far from us here, but usually like they have a missions week, and then they have like a family wellness month, and then they have like a financial literacy month, which is they start a sermon series on finances, and once that wraps up, they actually use that to kick off the start of the financial literacy program. Because people are hearing those messages in the church, and they're wrestling with their finances or their idea of the American dream or whatever it may be, and then faith and finances hits them right where they're at. So it's been very strategic for them. I really love their intentionality. One thing you said earlier, Bonnie, about the American dream made me think like, hey, if I didn't achieve that, then I'm a failure. And in some contexts, like, I think of the folks we work with, and their goal is to set up a $200 savings account by the end of class, right? And now we're selling them a house, nice grass, and a puppy running in the backyard. Like that isn't necessarily their vision point in time. Can they get there? Absolutely. But we want to make sure that this is contextualized to meet them where they're at. I'm just going to pick off a couple things that some of y'all have said, but work alongside needy and low income in our community. For my church members to be in a relationship with the marginalized in our community, to come alongside and encourage the vulnerable and low income in my community, right? To further the name of Jesus by equipping his people with the resources needed to meet their vital economic needs. Desire to see real life change through financial training, vocational training, job creation, economic empowerment. And this comes back to a big question on why we started our center 10 years ago, was what is the role of the faith community and the economic well-being of our city? And I feel like each of you are asking that question today and through this process. So I'm very encouraged to hear that. Any other questions up until this point? All right. Y'all make me feel like I do a great job. You know that? Like I don't mind. I don't mind the awkward silence as, even a university professor, but I would say, feel like we're tracking well. Couple things here. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Let me go ahead and bring up week 2 first before I do that. And some of you I've seen already have started the activity. By the way, can y'all see my screen? Can you see the what's the goal screen? I will say I can tell who's where usually. You see these little bubbles? So I would say if I'm not seeing progress from some of y'all in the next couple weeks, or you're falling a little behind, just expect a little reminder or a little gentle like, hey, make sure you're not falling behind. Because I don't want y'all to be doing all of this, all your homework in like week 6 at one shot, right? I think I would say definitely trust the process and track along. Andrew File is our person who's praying today. Andrew and I have been doing this for 10 years together. It's one of my favorite people in the world. Actually, like I found myself as I was clicking through the people who are praying in this series, I was like, that's one of my favorite people in the world. And I said that for every person every week because I've worked with them in some capacity. But what's the goal this week? Right, so obviously you'll hear the prayer, you'll have another video this week, and you'll start to learn about the 2 key themes that the Chalmers Center has in this video. But one of the key things is Jesus is making all things new. And I'll bring those up here in a little bit. But the other piece that we're going to be jumping into is fasting and praying. And this is something we'll encourage y'all to join me, and I'll be doing this with y'all. Let's see, today's Wednesday. We meet next Wednesday. Usually I fast from lunch on Fridays, but that's like a 2-day warning to everyone who's like, hey, 2 days we're fasting. So I would say if Friday at lunch works for y'all, I would encourage you to take that time to fast and pray. You will see a little article for fasting for beginners in here, which I'm really glad to see that in here. For those of you maybe who haven't fasted and prayed before, what does that look like? And so again, prepare yourself for it. Make sure you're hydrated, right? And all the above. But I would encourage you to do that with us. I will also email a link with like a list of like prayer requests that you would like to bring before the Lord. So if you would like to add something to that, I would love to see that. But I do have a starting list for us in the process as well for that. Next up, and I'm walking you through this, so you can see this is what we're doing this week. Okay, but the 2 key themes here come up for the Chalmers Center is Jesus is making all things new, including our money and relationships. And the second one being God has accomplished to use our money to accomplish his work in the world. And so as co-collaborators with God, what does that look like for us, and how do these themes connect with our faith and finances community? And then we have prayer points. As you'll see, every week we have prayer points that we're praying through. And so I added that to our fasting and prayer guide. And then you obviously have the optional dive deeper. These are, again, fantastic pieces for y'all to read. I won't say too much about them. You'll see an article here from Brian Ficker, who is one of the authors of the When Helping Hurts book. And then you have, I don't know how much you can really trust this John Mark Bowers guy, but he also wrote another article here for y'all to check out here. And then the last bubble is simply the Zoom link here. By the way, John Mark is on the call here, but I just throw that out there. So any questions on yours is locked? Is it supposed to be locked? Let me see. I don't know if I have the
Never mind. I refreshed my screen and it let me in. So yeah, never mind. Thanks.
Okay, good. I was worried. I don't have necessarily those options to lock and unlock, but I can always, I would say if you ever have any technical difficulties on the platform, like please call, email, or text me and we can figure that out pretty quick. Instead of you trying to figure it out for an hour, usually it's a pretty quick fix, or Chalmers needs to do something on their end. So, all right, I'm feeling good about this week. Any pending questions on what we covered here? Couple of things that I will note, the first like 2 weeks aren't super heavy and deep, I would say. They're kind of foundational to this. But in weeks 3, 4, and 5, that's when like the work really starts to pick up and we're actually wrestling with some bigger topics. So I would say if you're like chomping at the bit, it's like, I want more, like it's coming. So just know that. I will say there's also the expectation, because this is an online program and part of our goal is to train you as facilitators on this. In this process, you're getting all the foundational and core pieces to doing this. But at the same time, there is expectation where you will actually record yourself facilitating a section of the Faith and Finances program as a group. I'm likely going to split you up into 2, maybe 3 groups. I think we have 9 people, 8 people in our group. So 2 groups might be best, but you'll actually find a time to do it together. And then you will facilitate together like you would in a class with each other. So Bonnie would facilitate to Anthony, Julie, and Mei Ling, and then Julie, Anthony, and Mei Ling would be participants. And then once Bonnie's section's done, then Bonnie would become a participant and Anthony would become a facilitator and so forth. So just keep in mind that that's coming closer to week 5, but that is something that's helpful to this process.
How do you go back to previous links? Because I was trying to figure that out right now.
Go back to which links, Anthony?
The previous section.
Of like the program?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and share my screen really quick. And this is like a navigation. Sometimes it's a little hard to see. Can you all see my screen? And my screen might look a little bit different than yours because I have teach and design tools, as you will see right here. But usually if you're like in section 1, there's this little back arrow on the top left of your screen that will let you go back to the home page. And when you talk about links, you're trying to find like something from getting started or from week 1.
Yes, but I want to go back to week 1.
Yeah, and then you simply would click whichever piece you want to check out. So if you want to go back to the Discuss the Faith and Finances journey, it is there in the core shell. You can navigate to the next section if you want to. Is there something specific you're looking for, Pastor Anthony?
I wanted to go back and to week 1 and just to go over the comments again.
Yeah. Do you need the link to access the course?
No, I have it. I can pull it up if that's the case.
Great. So does that answer your question on how to get back to the previous links?
Yes.
Okay. That's a good question. All right. So I guess my final question to you, and I would ask y'all think about it a little bit and stick it in the chat, and we'll wrap up our time. But what was the most challenging thing you learned this week? What was most helpful? What encouraged you the most about the content this week?
For me, the gentleman who was in prison, and to try to understand when he came to the ministry, what information that truly inspired him to become further to where he is, and also to make an impact also in the ministry that has impacted him. That was one of the most encouraging things.
Powerful. I love Maurice's story. And again, I feel like I know many Maurices.
In the
Like in the article, oh, go ahead, Bonnie.
I was just in the middle or the additional stuff at the end, and it talked about the young girl who wanted to bring something to the meal because she had gotten some extra money, and like one person's like, no, honey, that's okay. You don't need to do that. And then being told that she could, because she was really disappointed that she couldn't, and how much it meant to her, even though she brought like a cup of soup or something, to share with everyone how huge that was for her and how good it made her feel. And remembering that, yeah, it seems so silly, looking at her limited resources to make her do anything, but it's not a matter of making her do something. She wanted to be able to share that. And it was huge for her to be able to do that. So when you mentioned the potluck thing, it's like, yeah, that, makes perfect sense. It's not a handout for them. They're participating.
Potluck, not necessarily the soup kitchen dynamic.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, Bonnie, because just encouraging her and allowing her to participate in providing part of the meal, that helped build her self-esteem. And we have to remember, as we deal with people that are low income and have so little, that we need to do everything we can to build them up and not make them feel like they're not worthy in their contributions to either a meal or to the course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think along those same lines too, just the community aspect that it creates when you have a meal with people and you're not given a meal. It not only builds them up, but they're partaking in being a part of a community. They're, they're bringing themselves and their self, and they are super welcomed to be a part of this community. And I think that there's just a lot of, there's a lot of confidence, and there's a lot that can come from when you gather people together, just to have you're creating a support system for everyone as well. And a lot of that stems from seeing her have the ability to bring something and be a part of it, rather than have everything given to her where she might feel less than.
And I'd come back to this dynamic where in community, sometimes people feel like they don't have anything to contribute or give in the process. And maybe that's the one thing that they've been able to contribute in the process for a long time, right? And so finding ways to foster that so that they are, again, co-collaborators and contributors to the process, that they very much are. It's a community of learners, and you're building community rather than, hey, I'm teacher, you're student, and you change the dynamic, you flip it on its head, if you will. Actually, one helpful read, sorry, I'm going to give you a ton of books by the end of today. If you ever want another book that I think is fantastic, it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. It is a fantastic read. It is something that I read early on in my career as a facilitator, even before Faith and Finances. And so I'll email that to y'all if y'all want to pick up an Amazon copy, but they're just fantastic reads when you start thinking of classroom dynamics. So let's see. Would someone like to close us out in prayer, and then we'll wrap up our time today? I see that we got a minute left here.
I can.
Go ahead, Pastor Anthony.
God, we thank you for this opportunity to learn and to come together so that we can become an impact, Father God, for your kingdom and for our community. Father God, we pray for those that we can impact and that you will bring to us so that we can do good and helpful to them. Help us, dear God, to learn and to understand the information that we can utilize to become effective. We thank you for our teacher and everyone who participate. And as we leave, Father God, please go with us through this week and guide us in everything that we have to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Anthony. And thank you, everyone, for your commitment and time and energy in this process. I look forward to seeing the interaction online, and we'll see y'all next Wednesday. Go in peace. Have a
You
great
too.
week.
Thanks, Carlos. Bye, everybody.